So I'm here with Ron Freeborn, one of the more distinguished and famous residents of Blewbury, I'm sure he'll admit. And we're going to talk a little bit about the mid-1960s, when he first moved to the village, and starting with the formation of Grahame Close.
Well, yeah, we moved in about 1965, Jackie and I, with our kiddie, Jo, and she was about 1 year old, 1.5 years old, and we were the first to buy on Grahame Close, and it was on Westbrook Street. There was just the 7 or 8 houses along Westbrook Street, and the rest of the estate wasn't started really. We were just the beginning, and the thing was that there was a bit of trouble in the village. The village really resented, because it was Boehm's house, and it was a very famous orchard there, and they just built an estate on it. And I'm not sure how the planners actually sorted that out and justified that. But we had a choice of the houses along Westbrook Street, and we chose, I think it was number 39 at the time. And the reason I chose that particular house in the middle section was the very good view we had of the church. And we were assured that they were building over the other side of the stream, of course, between us and the church, but they wouldn't build in front of the church with us, because it was planning permission thing, was or town planning. They could see, you could have a very good view of the church from Westbrook Street, from that space. Anyway, we moved in, and I did a drawing from the window of the church. It was a super composition, and then they built a house in front of us, completely. So that was, they did us bad by that. That was very bad. Anyway, but they built the rest of over the next 18 months, they built the rest of Grahame Close, and people moved in, and it was terrific, because it attracted an awful lot of young families, and the majority of those families moved in because and they wanted to be a part of the village. They didn't just buy houses to commute to London and Reading or whatever. They were very anxious to get in the village as a community, and that really revolutionised the village, because they were very enthusiastic and got involved in things and started new ideas, and things like the Village Society started up at that sort of stage, and it was really very exciting. And in 1967, a friend of mine, Tony Fortnum, and myself produced a book, and it was called Self-Portrait. It was produced and printed by Pres Wells, who honorary member of Blewbury. He lives in Long Rutnam, but he's been in Blewbury for all these years, and contributed tremendously. And he was a super printer, and he produced this book, and it was it was revolutionary. It was photocopied. No, that's not wrong. That's the wrong term. I've forgotten the term. But it was revolutionary in as much as it produced photographs, and we interviewed lots of folk in the village at the time. People like Margaret Steen, who was a very famous author, a novelist in the village, and Ruby Jinner, a great dancer, the British equivalent of Isadora Duncan. She wrote an article. Dick Francis was living in the village at the time, and we interviewed him.
A famous jockey, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Terrific, yeah. And we went on. Michael Martin Harvey, who took with his father, his famous father, he lived in the village, and he took Shakespeare over to America, and was strapped to the Santa Fe going across the Rockies, and for his 21st birthday he was strapped to the what's his name? What's he called? The front of the train.
So was he? Presumably not like a cow catcher.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, he was strapped to that. He had a bottle of champagne. He went through the Rockies and that sort of thing. Amazing character, but he was a great actor. He's been in various films and things like that. And there was a guy in the village at the time in Grahame Close called Peter Sheldon, Yeah, Peter Sheldon, and he was with the BBC, and he designed and produced the Elizabeth evenings, and because he was involved in the BBC, he had all these fantastic collections, costume collections.
Right.
And he was one of the starters of the Blewbury Players in a way, because he influenced in that sort of way.
So this picture that we're looking at now, is that the Blewbury wagon?
Yeah, that's the original Blewbury wagon. Yeah, we just acquired that in the village from Holborn, and that's in Ashbrook House. Mm-hmm. And this was the Elizabethan evening, and they had a Georgian evening. And it was spectacular stuff.
So was it like a performance, or was it?
Yeah, great big performance, and very little dialogue, but it was just almost like a pageant.
Oh wow!
And that sort of thing. It was huge, and we had cannons and all sorts of things, live cannons and stuff.
And do you know who the people are in this photo?
Yeah, this is Peter Sheldon.
That's the chap on the far right. Peter Saunders on the far right.
Yeah, and that's Olga Latham, who was the music director for our operas.
Yep.
And and I think that's Mrs. Sheldon, Peter's wife. She was a great singer, and so it was all happening here. It was terrific stuff, very very lively. But the book, unfortunately, had an article in it which upset the village, and it upset the village so much that Jackie and I were talking about leaving the village. And we were summoned down to Eastfields by Labour councillor Pip Bartlett, and said, "Look, you've produced this book and it upsets people, and we must do something about it and bring the village together." There were 4 pubs in the village, and each pub, at the time of when the Grahame Close was building up, the pubs were individual. I mean, the Barley Mow was really passing trade, and the jockeys, jockey lads, used the Barley Mow. The Load of Mischief was the sort of east end of the village, that sort of area, and that sort of thing. The Red Lion was the new people, and the New Inn at the top of the road, London Road, that was farmers, basically.
Right.
So there were 4 sort of areas. The school was sort of on its own, the post office did its own thing, and so the village wasn't together, it was divided. And so when he said, "We've got to get the village together," I thought, well, it was never together, it was all over the bloody place. But anyway, we thought, I came up with an idea, and I thought we might do a music hall. Nobody liked that idea at all. It was the 60s, I mean, we were talking Beatles and things like this, and Rolling Stones and stuff like that. And who wants to do a Victorian musical? But this was different. The musical was different because it was based on the theatre of failure. Everybody that went on that stage couldn't do it. Couldn't do a damn thing. But they did it with great sincerity and enthusiasm. And it was hilarious. I mean, magicians that couldn't magish, or whatever, jugglers that couldn't juggle, escapologists that couldn't get out of a paper bag, but it was done in all seriousness, and it was an absolute riot. And the music and the production was taken very seriously, and it was in the old village hall, and it brought everybody together. I mean, east and west of the village and this sort of thing, everybody mixed together for the very first time on stage in chorus and stuff, and they all had a great time. They really had it was very successful. So it went on. It went on for 4 or 5 years, an annual music hall on this theatre of failure thing, and it caught. I mean, I think the last one we did in the Play Close, with a big marquee which sat 600 people.
Goodness me.
Yeah, I mean, it was huge, and that was so successful that really started other things. In 1970, we did Noah's Flood, the opera, Benjamin Britten, and then that was so successful. I mean, in other words, the village were coming together. Everybody, when we did something big like the musical or then the operas, every part, the WI, the old folks, everything, everybody stopped and helped in these big collaborations, and it was great. It was a terrific area, and time of our lives in the village. They sort of brought the whole village together. It was great.
So in terms of that first one, so that would have been, what year would the first one have been?
68.
That's 68.
Yeah.
And can you describe some of the characters who were involved in pulling this together in addition to yourself?
Oh gosh, yeah. Roy East recently died, and he was a great artist and creator. There was people like Tony Loy. The Loys came into the village during this time and sort of got involved very much.
Again, were they part of the Grahame Close?
Oh yeah,
run?
yeah, that's it. That's it. I mean, there were the Grices. That was a family of the day. Fortnums, of course. You know, Downers. You know, they're all that lot when they were young, in their 20s, and there was an awful lot of energy about it. See, I mean, it was terrific.
Because one of the things that makes, as a resident of the village, that makes it great is that mixture of sort of old and new, and young and old, and
that's
local
right.
and
that's right.
Yeah, it's a very special place to live.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it's changed completely, but it's still great. I mean, it's you folks that have come in the last sort of 20 years, as it were, 10 years, and you've carried on and you've done something different. It's changed in nature, but it's still fantastic. And we go into other villages and the villages are dead, and people are living isolated on their own, and they don't mingle, they don't get together at all, and don't support. And but we're very fortunate. This village has always been an amazing character.
So one of the contributors was Reg Taylor.
Yeah, that's right. Reg and Pearl Taylor, and they ran Parsonage Farm in the centre of the village, and they did the Sunday papers and things like that. But they were very influential, and he wrote a very substantial article in this, and I just like so much, he says, and as a go at the village, it's changing. He's one of the old boys and wasn't too keen on all the changes and stuff like that. But he wasn't alone, you see. I mean, they really didn't like the village. Really, initially didn't like Grahame Close, you see, and then one or two people, tried to stop that. I've forgotten.
So was he one of the people that tried to prevent? Because there's obviously even today with the housing crisis, there's a lot of demand to build on land.
That's right.
Filling, and
that's
so
right.
I can imagine Grahame Close being the first modern development of the
that's
time,
right.
raising a few eyebrows for sure.
Yeah, sure, that was it, definitely. And it, and we still don't know quite. When we came into the village, we weren't too popular, you see, because we were the people that lived in Grahame Close. You see, and somebody had lived here 10 years and said, it's going to be 30 years before you're accepted as a villager. Because she'd been here 10 years and she was still a newcomer. And you had to be here for about 300 years before you were accepted as a villager. But anyway, times change, and we eventually seem to be accepted and stuff like that.
Because of course Grahame Close is named after Kenneth Grahame.
Yeah, sure.
And he lived in, I think it was just after the book was written. He moved to, is it Boehm's cottage?
That's right, Boehm's house. Yeah.
Boehm's house.
Yeah.
And that was part of an orchard that went all the way down to the church.
Definitely, yeah.
So you were denied your church side view, which,
well, that's right, exactly. You see,
as the current inhabitant of number 20, I'm 17 rather. I'm quite pleased to have that view now.
Well, it was, yeah. I mean, I did a postcard there, and I can't find it at the moment. I've still got it somewhere. And I did a postcard from the window. It was a lovely view and a very good composition. But that's gone because they built another house in between us and the view of the church. So there we go.
Maybe you could clear something up for me. It's a bit confusing because it was number 39, I think, that you moved into. But their lower numbers are in between yourself and the church. So did they? They must have planned to build them there.
Well, they changed the numbers. I think we ended up. Our house became 43.
I see.
We were in 43 in Grahame Close, with the lovely view of the church.
They changed all the numbers to.
They changed. Yeah, that's right. So we felt very cheated, and because we had choice, we could have lived anywhere on Grahame Close.
Yeah.
We chose this number
Because of
and
the view.
Yeah, because of the view, and then they built a house between having guaranteed that we couldn't do it, you know. But anyway, that's one of those things.
So the first bit to be built was the part on Westbrook Street that became the first part.
The line of the Westbrook Street Road, yeah. And the other thing, contentious thing, was that the gateway, the far corner of Grahame Close onto the Play Close,
yes,
was always a right of way. We could always use that because there was no footpath for our kiddies on Westbrook Street. You see, when you go around Westbrook Street, you were straight on the road. There was no footpath,
right.
So it was very iffy. So and then towards the end, by the end, they built all the houses on Grahame Close. We weren't allowed to use that gateway. That was, and he's written this. These articles.
So Dick Dottridge, the chair of the parish council, wrote the articles at the start.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's contributions in here from others, including the jockey, so the famous jockey who lived in the village at the time.
Yeah, the famous jockey, and Dick Francis. He was a novelist.
So he was a novelist as well?
Oh God, yeah, very famous novelist. I mean, that's right. He rode Point Haven and in the Grand National, and he flopped. It was the horse that went pam.
Oh really?
That's Dick Francis.
You have to then, like, cause I don't know much about the horse racing. So the horse flopped.
Yeah,
was this in the National?
Grand National. Yeah, he was ahead. He was 30 yards ahead. Anyway, where are we? He rode for the Queen Mother 4 seasons, including the sensational. Do you want me to read this?
Yeah, go and read that next
right. Professional jockey, and we interviewed. Were we recording? Interviewed Dick Francis, and he was the famous jockey who rode for the Queen Mother for 4 seasons, including the sensational Grand National of 1956, when his mount, Devon Lock, collapsed 50 yards from the winning post when 10 lengths in front. Now racing correspondent and a highly successful writer of thriller novels, invariably setting the racing world. And he's married and has 2 sons, one of whom wants to be a jockey, he said. But he did a very good interview for us, and he's a really charming chap. Lived in the village. He had a plane, and he used to fly into Blewbury and the fields going towards Didcot.
Really?
Yeah.
So you were an impromptu airport in Blewbury.
Well, that's right. There was a field at the back.
I didn't know that.
Just along the London Road, Besselsley. Yeah. And the last house, White House, before you leave the village.
Oh yes.
And behind that was Dick Francis' house.
I see.
Yeah, you see, and we bumped into every now and again a horse was sort of beyond into the road, a thoroughbred. And I remember.
I see, because that's still a paddock today.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It?
Yeah,
yes.
that's it. Yeah, that was quite a famous place.
So he had an airstrip there.
Yeah, well, in a field. He had a 2-seater plane, just a field.
A little Cessna.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So where would he fly to? Was he often?
To various race courses and things like that. You see. Yeah, he just flew over the place. Yeah. He was a great character. Yeah, it was good. And the pubs were very good. The Barley Mow. The chap that ran the Barley Mow for many years, very popular, was called Phil Hood, and he played the trumpet for the orchestra and things like Noah's Flood and stuff like that. And he was a boxing enthusiast, and he helped the saddle lads, the trainers, with the boxing, and appeared on television a couple of times. But he was a really great character. He was a Londoner, and he knew the Cray twins when he was in London, and got involved a wee bit there. I think that's perhaps why he escaped to Blewbury. But he always had Dobermans and Doberman dogs, and he used to cut them.
Coffee.
Would we like coffee?
Love one.
And sorry,
It's all right.
I'm actually doing that.
Yeah.
Let's go through the argument with Kate Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, and they were his favourites. He loved them, and he was having a big row with two of his favourite Hollywood stars. Yeah, they just came out of Hampstead Heath. On that, yeah.
That's wonderful. If the Doberman had eaten the dog, it would have been a sort of a pun on the par with Freddie Starr ate my hamster.
Absolutely, absolutely right.
Yeah, Phil's Doberman ate my dog. But this self-portrait document, I mean, there's lots of lovely stories in here. There's an article in there from Hugh Pickles, who was the can you tell us anything about him?
He was almost legendary vicar in Blewbury. He was a great cricket lover, and he featured quite often on the Test matches series of the BBC broadcast. He was mentioned quite a lot. He knew the commentators on BBC television, and was very much. And then when he died, he did one or two revolutionary things in the village. He created sort of dance routines on occasions in the church services and things like that. So he was quite a character. And when he died, I think there were sort of 12 vicars carried his coffin up to the cemetery, and he had a cricket bat on the coffin, that sort of thing. So it was a cricket team just carried his coffin up, and no, he was a real character. He had a dog called Justice, and the dog was a nuisance, and made a nuisance of himself in the church. And also, when we did Noah's Flood in 1970, the opera, Hugh Pickles insisted on being God. He took the part of God. He didn't audition for it. He demanded that he was God. So, the rehearsals in the church for the opera with a big orchestra, because we had about 150 people involved, and Hugh was in the back of the church with his lines ready for God and whatever, but he was listening to the test match. He was listening to the bloody test match, and it drove me. I was directing at the time. Drove me mad, and also his dog started barking. And at one point, I'd kicked the dog. I literally kicked the dog out of the church. It was a bloody nuisance, and but he was a real madhouse. But he was a great character. Yeah, that's right. Well, he features on the film, I think, doesn't he? The Snow Queen.
Oh yes,
right.
yes, I believe. Yeah,
he features a wee bit on that, and you can see the sort of character he is.
So there's a lady in there mentioned. There's a lady in there mentioned called Ruby Ginner.
Yes. Now Ruby Ginner was the British equivalent to Isadora Duncan, the famous American choreographer, Greek dancer, and Ruby was very much in her line and great influence in British dance. And she shared a house, she lived in Ickleton House at the end of the village, and she shared it with Margaret Steen, the novelist. And Margaret Steen was the girlfriend of Sir William Nicholson, who was the last of the great British painters, the sort of master painters, Edwardian. And Sir William Nicholson, I think, was Catholic, and I think he ran away with this young lady, this young brilliant novelist called Margaret Steen, and came down to the village with her, you see, which was the done thing. The village had no squire. It didn't have a sort of hierarchy, and this was very attractive to the artist sort of people. And when we first came to the village, there were lots of little old ladies that lived in the centre of the village, and there was no lighting in the village, but they walked around with lanterns. And these, good evening, Mrs. So-and-so, good evening, Miss So-and-so, and this sort of thing, and hello, and they were very charming old ladies in their 70s, 80s, that sort of thing. But they were, in their time, they were sort of gaiety girls who were planted down here by their boyfriends in London. And they grew up to be respectable old ladies, you see. but their past was slightly questionable, probably. But anyway, they were great characters in the village, and they lived in the sort of down by the Red Lion and those sort of cottages down there. And Marguerite was the girlfriend of Sir William, and but she was a very successful novelist. The Sun Is My Undoing, Stallion is one of her books, and she was a bestseller in the 1930s, 40s, that sort of thing. And she did very well. Sir William Nicholson died in the 40s. He was much older than her, of course. And so we got to know Marguerite when we first moved into the village, and she was a Miss Havisham. She was a very striking, dominant sort of character, and she smoked International Peter Stuyvesant cigarettes, which pointed at you when she was smoking. She pointed these damn packs, these gigantic cigarettes.
They're quite slim and long.
Yeah, that's right. Really, yeah. And she used it very well. And she'd get round. Everybody in the village knew her as Lady Nicholson. She never married. She wasn't Lady Nicholson, but everyone respected it. It was before this sort of thing was accepted. This sort of living together was accepted, and so she was always referred to as Lady Nicholson. And she liked to be called Lady Nicholson, but of course she was never Lady Nicholson. She was just Marguerite Steen, and just a very clever novelist and lady. But she was a real character in a way, and quite dominant. And she used to frequent Borlase Gallery, and that was a very important part of our lives in those days. In Borlase Gallery, which had celebrated lots of local artists and things like that, and quite good artists. It was a good gallery, and well covered by the local press and whatever. But Marguerite used to walk in, and she'd buy the odd piece of painting or the odd bit of sculpture, whatever. So that was it.
So quite a sort of creative melting pot. And you said earlier that the village didn't have a squire.
No.
So for the benefit of someone who's brought up in suburban London, where squire meant something completely different.
Yeah, that's right.
What was the significance of the squire in a village?
Well, it was a hierarchy. The squire, the villages around here had mostly hierarchy of squires and that sort of. The fact that Blewbury didn't have a squire, it meant there was nobody in charge. There was no hierarchy at all. So that attracted artists, novelists, all sorts of odd characters like that, and writers and whatever. And so it was quite rich in those sort of people, because it was a general.
There was sort of
thing.
Freedom to be expressive and
exactly.
do things and so on.
Yeah,
so
that's
forth.
right.
So the squire would presumably have given permission for events to happen.
That's right. There was a hierarchy in the village. You see, that's what the squire represented, I gather. And but Blewbury didn't have one, so it attracted all these sort of characters.
So it'd be relatively anarchic.
Yeah, that's right.
In the context.
Yeah, exactly that.
And there's another interesting article in there from Barbara Bauer. So, what do you remember about her?
She was a bit of eccentric. I mean, she was in her 80s when I knew her, and she was Barbara Eufen Todd, and she created Wurzel Gummidge, the famous book, children's book, and she lived in the village during the war years. And there was a really good article in Women's Own magazine in around about the early 50s, and the article said Barbara Eufen Todd, Wurzel Gummidge, living in Blewbury during the war years, and they interviewed her there, and she was living in the village, and she had a poltergeist, and she used to get up in the morning, and stand chairs up and put pots up where she'd been told, and say, "You naughty, naughty boy, you naughty, naughty boy," and she'd put the furniture back where this poltergeist of the night had gone. the trouble is, I suspect that she drank too much. You see, and before she went to bed, she fell over everything. But anyway, she was a wee bit like that. I mean, you couldn't get her until 2:00 in the afternoon, because she'd had a drink in the morning, and then she had a kip, and then at 5:00 she started drinking again. So the best time to get Barbara to chat and write an article for this book was about 2:00 in the afternoon, and she was very good. But the trouble was, I'm going on to the ghost story now. You don't want that, really. We'll forget that for another time.
We'll leave that one for another time. Actually, no, while we're in the thread, go on, keep talking about the ghosts.
Okay, well, the thing was that one of the things, Margaret Steen, going back to her, she said, look, see Barbara Ufentodd, and she'll write you an article about the ghosts of the village. And the ghosts of the village, I think at the time, I didn't know, I hadn't seen this anywhere in the paper, but I was told there were 6 registered ghosts in the village. And 6 registered. So one of them was to do with Barbara Ufentodd. And she had this poltergeist. And so I went to her and said, can you, Marguerite Lady Ingleson wants you to write an article about the ghosts of the village. Yeah. The thing is that after I had a word with Barbara, and she was willing to do the story about the ghosts in the village, and I had a phone call from Reg Taylor at Parsonage Farm. He says, can I see you, please? And I went down on my scooter. I was a mod at the time, you see. I had a pork pie hat and a lambretta. And so I whizzed round to Parsonage Farm, and he gave me a glass of sherry. He said, what's all this about the bloody ghosts? And I said, Barbara's going to do it. No, she's not. She's not going to write an article, and we're not having any of that. So in the 1920s, somebody wrote an article about the witches' coven between here and Aston Tyrrell, up on the hill. There's a witches' coven, and the press got hold of it and came down, and all the prices of the houses in the village went down because of the witches' coven, and people didn't want to buy a house in here. So we're not having ghost stories because the price of the houses are going down. He said, so you've got to stop that. And he said, that Barbara Bauer, she should know better, because she told the story to Women's Own magazine in 1950s about her poltergeist. And that was printed, and families wouldn't just buy the house, and she couldn't sell the house. I won't tell you what the house was in the village, but I know the people who live there now. But that was bad news. I mean, you don't mention things like that, and because the house prices fall.
Well, having said that, we might have since established that the poltergeist was more sherry related than
that's right.
A spirit of a different nature.
Well, that's right. But it was. The Women's Own took it seriously, but Barbara Bauer was younger then, you see, and so she was probably more articulate and was coming across better. And what probably wasn't on the drink so much in those days. Really. Anyway, okay.
So we started. So what we've got in front of us is a copy of this wonderful Blewbury self-portrait, and the gentleman involved in printing and producing it was, in addition to yourself, of course, Mr. Prez Wells.
Definitely.
So how did this come about in terms of? I mean, the production's fantastic. So how did it come about?
Well, it was revolutionary at the time. It was a new form of printing, and was not very well known in England at the time. And so when he produced this, and I'm sort of on the art side, and one or two of my friends can draw and whatever, so we had this opportunity of producing this very attractive at the time book, and it caught the eye of the design centre in London, and they had it on display there, and the Civic Trust wanted 2,000 copies. They ordered 2,000 copies of it, which we couldn't do in the end because of the controversy of the print, and we had to stop the print made, so only 1,000 copies actually were produced. But I think there's a few around in the village, and people have still got them from many years back.
So where was it actually printed? Because it was as a printer.
Yeah, it was printed at Didcot.
Ah.
There was a printing. He had a small printing press at Didcot, and it was terrific. And from then he went on to the Kilburn Press in Wallingford, which is a huge place, and then ended up in a printer in Cardiff, in Wales. And so he was a very, very successful printer. Press.
It's quite a wonderful document. There's one chap I wanted to ask you about, which is Peter Sheldon, who I understand was involved in the BBC at the time.
Yeah, he came to the village and came to live in Grahame Close, and he was quite an interesting character. And working for the BBC, he had access to all sorts of costumes and props and things like that. And so he was living in the village, and as I say, these people came not just to live in the village, but to work in it and create things. Peter decided to sort of stage a few pageants, big pageant things. They weren't too theatrical, but they were spectaculars, and including hundreds of people. I mean, if you wanted to be in one of his productions, you would turn up on a Saturday morning and be given a stick, which is a spear, and you'd be marching along with 3 or 4 other people for 100 yards that way, 100 yards another way, and then stand for about a quarter of an hour. On the dress rehearsal, you were among 300 people. You see, not just five or six of you, and you were all in costume, and it was an amazing, you see, experience for people to get involved in. So he saw things on a very large scale, and was very clever with that. But he wasn't too theatrical. He didn't direct plays or anything like that. But he created these spectacular events. You know, that was it.
So I imagine it wasn't too much of a leap to go from this great pageantry to adding a little bit of alcohol and doing it on Boxing Day.
Oh, that's right, exactly. Boxing Day, yeah, exactly. That was that all created. That started in 1970, very soon after, and then that was all to do with the Blewbury Society, and I became chairman of the Blewbury Society. I think it was 1970. That's right, and that's when the Boxing Day walk started. And then my friend Ruiz was, I think, in 1972, and he created the Father Christmas sleigh, and he created that, which is still running, obviously, today and this year, and it's all those things happened at that day, and there were all sorts of, as I say, amazing ideas floating around and being introduced into the village at the time. So it all worked amazingly well, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Ron.
Okay.